Chapter 4. The moon was barely up when, making sure not to wake his grandmother, Atrus crept out. Taking a rope and a large piece of sack from the storeroom, he ventured out onto the volcano's slope. Halfway up the slope, he paused, feeling a renewed sense of shock at the altered shape of the caldera's rim. That physical change seemed somehow linked to another, deeper change within himself. Atrus stood at the rim, looking down at the loose path that hugged the volcano's inner slope. Staring down into that darkness, he expected a sense of threat that he'd not felt before. He climbed over the rim, moving down into the darkness, disconcerted by the unfamiliar rumbling that emanated from the depths below. A tiny shiver ran up his spine, stirring the hairs at the back of his neck. Out on the volcano's floor, it was strangely warm and humid. Atrus looked about him, then slowly made his way across, his heart pounding, his eyes searching the nearest outcrops of rock. Steam swirled and hissed, wreathing those shapes, transforming them in the moon's fine silvered light. The battery was where he left it. For a moment, he crouched over it, his left hand resting loosely on the familiar casing. But his eyes were drawn to the tunnel's mouth. Compelled, he walked across. Then, taking the tinderbox from his inner pocket, he pressed the catch and stepped inside. In the glowing light from the tinder, he could see how the tunnel stretched away into the darkness, sloping gradually like the giant wormhole cutting through solid rock. It was cool there, surprisingly so, as if a breeze was blowing from within the tunnel. He walked on, counting his steps. At 50 paces he stopped and turned, looking back the way he came. From where he stood, he could not see the entrance. The curves of the tunnel obscured it from sight. He walked on as if in some kind of spell, compelled to see where this led. The smell of sulfur was far less strong than it had been. Other, stranger smells filled the air, musty, unfamiliar smells. Atrus turned and went over the wall, placing his palms against it. It was cool and smooth and dry. He was about to move away when some irregularity further down the wall drew his attention. He walked over to it, holding up the tinder, and then stopped. Facing him, a single word had been cut into the wall. A huge thing, half his height and twice its breadth. Denis. There was no mistaking it. It was a Denis word. Atrus stared at it, not recognizing it, but committing it to memory. Until now, he had only half believed the things his grandmother had told him. There were days, instead, where he imagined that she had made the books on her shelves herself, in the same way she seemed to conjure her paintings from the air or turn a piece of unformed rock into an exquisitely carved figure. Such thoughts had disturbed him, for he had never known his grandmother to lie, yet the tales were so strange, so fantastic, that he found it hard to believe that such things had ever really happened. Atrus began to back away, to head back for the entrance, but as he did, he almost slipped on something beneath his feet. It rolled away from him, beginning to glow, softly at first, and then brightly, its warm red light filling the tunnel. He went across and crouched beside it, putting his hand out tentatively to see if it was hot. Satisfied it was cool, he picked it up, holding it between his thumb and forefinger to study it. It was a small, perfectly round rock, a marble of some kind. He had collected rocks and crystals for almost 10 years now, but he had never seen its like. He cupped it in his right hand, surprised by its lack of warmth. Dousing the tinder, he slipped it into his pocket and then straightened up, holding the marble out, looking to see if there were any others, but several minutes' search revealed no more. Then, knowing time was pressing, he turned and hurried out, meaning to raise the battery before Anna woke, and wondered where he was. It took almost an hour for him to drag the battery back up to the rim. Anna came and helped him in the last 30 feet or so, standing on the lip above him, straining on the rope, while he knelt and pushed the battery from below. In silence, they carried it down the slope of the cleft. Anna disappeared over the cleft wall, returning a moment later with a bowl of water. Atrus sat, staring at his hands where they lay folded in his lap, waiting for her to chastise him for disobeying her, but she was silent still. "It was my fault," he said, finally glancing at her. wondering why she had said nothing. I wanted to put things right. Expressionless, she handed him the bowl. Drink that, and then come. I'll make you breakfast. I think it's time I told you a story. Atrus had been sitting on the ledge beside the kitchen window, the empty bowl beside him as he listened, fascinated to his grandmother's tale. He had heard all kinds of tales from her across the years, but this was different. Different because, unlike the others, there was no great deeds of heroism, no man to match the hour. Yet, finishing her tale, Anna's voice shook with emotion. And so, when Viavis finally returned, the fate of the Denis was sealed. Within a day, the great work of millennia was undone, and the great caverns of Denis emptied of life, and all because of Tiana's misjudgment. Atrus was silent a while, and then he looked up at Anna. So you blame Tiana, then? She nodded. But she couldn't have known. Surely. Besides, she did what she thought best. To salve her own conscience, maybe. But was it best for the Denis? There were others who wanted Viavis put to death after the first revolt. If their voices had been listened to, if only Tiana had not spoken so eloquently to the Great Council. Anna felt silent again, her head lowered. Atrus frowned and then shook his head. I didn't know. No. Anna stared a moment longer at her hands and then looked to him and smiled. Nor does it really matter now. All that is in the past. The Denis are no more. Only the tales remain. He took the still glowing marble from his pocket and held it out to her. I found it on the floor of the volcano. At the sight of the marble, her whole countenance changed. Where did you say you found it? In the volcano, he said, his voice less certain than before. Near where the battery had fallen. She stared back at him. In the tunnel? Yes. Slowly, Anna reached out and took the fire marble from his hand, holding it up. She dropped it suddenly into the bowl of water at her side. Instantly, it was extinguished. You must not go there again, Atrus. It's very dangerous down there. But grandmother, she stared at him, her normally gentle face harder than he had ever seen it. You must not go there again, Atrus. You're not ready. Promise me, Atrus. Please. I promise. Good, she said, more softly, reaching out to rest her hand upon his shoulder. Each afternoon, as the sun began to descend and the shadows spread across the foot of the cleft, Anna and Atrus would sit in the cool shade on the low stone ledge behind the pool and talk. Today, Atrus had brought his journal out and sat there, the ink pot beside him on the ledge, copying out the word Anna had drawn on a loose sheet. For a while, he was silent, concentrating, his keen eyes flickering from Anna's drawing to his own, checking that he had the complex figure right. And then he looked up. Grandmother. Anna, who was sitting back with her head against the cool stone wall, her eyes closed, answered him quietly. Yes, Atrus. I still don't understand. You say there's no English equivalent to this word, but I can't see why that should be. Surely they had the same things as us. She opened her eyes and sat forward, stretching out her bare brown toes, and then, placing her hands on her knees, she looked at him. Words aren't just words, Atrus. Words are... Well, let me see if I can explain it simply. At the simplest level, a word can be a label. Tree, sand, rock. When we use such words, we know roughly what is meant by them. We can see them in our mind's eye. What precise kind of tree or sand or rock? For that, we need further words. Words which, in their turn, are also labels. A large tree, or maybe a palm tree. Red sand, or maybe fine sand. Jagged rocks, or maybe limestone rocks. The first word alters our sense of the second word in a fairly precise manner. At another level, words can represent ideas. Love, intelligence, loyalty. These, as I'm sure you see, aren't quite so simple. We can't simply add an extra word to clarify what we mean, particularly when the ideas aren't simple ones. To get the real meaning of such concepts, we need to define them in several ways. Love, for instance, might be mixed with pride, or hope, or perhaps with jealousy and fear. Intelligence, likewise, might refer to the unthinking, instinctive intelligence of an ant, or the deeper, more emotionally rooted intelligence of a man. And even within men, intelligence takes on many separate forms. It can be slow and deep, quick, sparkling, loyalty. Loyalty can be the blind loyalty of a soldier to his commander, or the stubborn loyalty of a wife to a man who has wronged her, or she saw he was smiling. What is it? He handed her the loose sheet back. I think I see. At least, I think I know what you were going to say. Anna found herself grinning, pleased as ever by his quickness, his perceptiveness. Atrus rarely needed to be told a thing twice, and often, as now, he was way ahead of her. Go on, she said. Atrus hesitated, tilting his head slightly, as he always did when he was thinking, and then choosing his words carefully, he began. Well, just as those words that describe ideas are a level above the words that are simple descriptive labels, so there's a farther, more complex level above that, one which the Denis functions on, the Denis word functions on. Yes, and I see that, but he frowned and then shook his head. What I can't see is what could be more complex than ideas. I can't picture in my head what that higher level might be. And that is precisely why there's no English equivalent for this. Yes, but what does it mean? Well, this word, this particular Denis word, is to do with the circulation of air, with wind patterns and humidity. Atrus stared at her now, his brow knitted. But surely such word would be a label? No, not this word. This word does more than simply describe. Then, but he clearly could not see what she was driving at. He looked at her, his pale eyes pleading for an explanation. Anna laughed. You must just accept that there is such a level, Atrus. But you said, I know what I said, and I still mean it. You must question everything and find the truth in it, but this once you must simply accept what I'm telling you. There is something beyond labels and ideas, something which is a synthesis of the two, something that Denis discovered many, many years ago and learned to put into words. One day you will understand more clearly, but for now, she could see Atrus was unhappy with that. He had been taught to question everything, to look with his own eyes and quantify and check. He had been taught never to accept things simply because he had been told they were true. And now, well, now she was asking him to break the habit of his thought. I should not have had him draw that word, she thought, wondering at the instinct that had made her do it. He's not ready for the Garo Hefti. Yet generally she trusted her instincts. Generally they were proved right. As he looked away, she could see how he was still struggling with the notion of how an idea could also be a label, how something so general could also be specific and descriptive, and yet part of her wanted to put him out of his misery and tell him, but he wasn't ready yet. Anna stood and stretched and then looked about her at the orderliness of the cleft. Sometimes in her imagining she thought of the cleft and of her grandson's mind in much the same vein, as if one were a metaphor for the other. Yet at that moment she understood the inadequacy of the comparison. For just as one day he would outgrow this tiny living space and venture out into the world, so his thoughts and speculations were certain one day to outgrow her careful nurturing of them. Looking at him, she knew he was destined to be greater than herself, wiser, more formidable of mind, and yet the thought did not scare her or make her envious. If anything, it made her sad, for she got great pleasure from teaching him, and to think of losing that. Anna sighed, and then picking her way carefully across the cleft, mounted the steps. It was time to make supper. full month passed, and as the moon came round to full once more, Atrus made his way idly up the slope, whistling to himself one of the songs Anna had taught him as a child, a Denis song that had the simplest of tunes. And as he whistled, he heard Anna's voice in his head softly singing the refrain. As he came to the end of it, he looked up and stopped dead, staring open-mouthed at the sight that met his eyes. Ahead of him, the whole of the upper slope was wreathed in a thick cloud of brilliantly white vapor, as if a thick curtain had suddenly been dropped over the volcano's edge. The mist slowly roiled like the steam on the surface of a cooking pot, neither advancing nor retreating, yet turning in upon itself constantly. It was so strange, so unlike anything Atrus had ever seen, that he stepped back, suddenly afraid. And as he did, a man stepped from within that glistening whiteness, seeming for a moment almost to be a part of it. A tall, unearthly figure with a large forehead and a strong, straight nose, over the bridge of which was strapped a pair of glasses identical to Atrus's own. A white cloak flapped out behind the stranger, giving him the appearance of some great, mythical king. Rooted to the spot, Atrus watched the stranger walk down the slope toward him, his fear transformed to awe by the strength and energy, the controlling power and cold assurance of the creature who approached. Atrus staggered back, astonished. Above him, the figure stopped, and lifting the thick lenses that covered his eyes, squinted down at Atrus. "I see you have my glasses." Atrus stared, unable to answer. The man who stood above him was as pale as the moon, his hair as white as bleached marble, and the irises of his eyes were huge, a thin, pale circle of green about them. His cheekbones were finely chiseled and yet strong, his hands both delicate and powerful. Everything about him, from the cut of his clothes to his aristocratic demeanor, spoke of an innate strength allied to an effortless elegance. He seemed old, certainly, but in a timeless way that reminded Atrus of his grandmother. He stared back at Atrus as an eagle stares, and then spoke again. "Well, boy, have you no greeting for your father?" My recognition hit Atrus like a physical blow. He shook his head. What's your name?" "Atrus." "Atrus, of course." The man stretched out a hand and placed it on Atrus's head, the contact like an electric shock. "And I am Gen, son of Atrus." Atrus swallowed. He was dreaming. For certain he was dreaming. Nervous, he touched his tongue against his upper lip, feeling the hard, salty shape of a grit of sand. "No, not a dream." "Gen?" Atrus said softly, echoing the word. The stranger nodded and then removed his hand. "Good. Now go and inform your grandmother that she has a visitor." Atrus ran down the moonlit slope, calling to Anna loudly as he ran, the dust flying up behind him. As he came to the cleft wall, he almost vaulted it, forgetting to remove his sandals. "Grandmother! Grandmother!" Her head poked out from the kitchen window, startled. "What's happened?" Atrus stood in the swaying bridge, breathless, gasping his answer. "A stranger has come. He sent me on ahead." Anna's mouth fell open. "Gen," she said, almost whispering. Then, collecting herself, she ducked back inside. There was the sound of a metal bowl falling against the stone floor, and then the outside door flew open. Barefoot, she hurried down the steps that hugged the wall, her haste surprising Atrus. "Grandmother!" But she barely seemed to heed him as she circled the narrow rim of the inner wall and began to climb the rung ladder. Atrus turned, watching as she clambered over the cleft wall, even as the stranger with the ash-white hair, the man who called himself his father, strode across and stopped, barely 10 feet from the cleft. "Mother?" he asked quietly, tilting his head slightly. "Gen," she said once more, hesitating. And then she stepped closer, hugging him tightly. "Where have you been, my son? Why in the Maker's name did you not come back?" But Atrus, watching, noticed how the warmth of her embrace was not reciprocated, how lightly the stranger's hands touched her shoulders, how distant he was as he stepped back from her, like a great lord from one of his tales. "I came to see the child," he said, as if he had not heard her. "I came to see my son." Atrus lay sprawled out on his belly on the top of the cleft wall, staring across the shadowed rectangle of the kitchen and at the bright square of the window in which Anna and the newcomer were framed. Though the two had been talking for some while now, little of real importance had been said. Even so, there was a strange tension between them. Anna particularly seemed to be walking on eggshells, afraid to say too much, yet keen to know where Gen had been and what he had done. By comparison, Gen was relatively taciturn, ignoring her questions when it suited him not to answer them. Just now, Gen was sitting on the polished stone ledge to the right of the tiny galley kitchen. Beside the door, his booted feet spread wide, his long, delicate hands resting on his knees. As he looked up at Anna, he had removed his cloak. Beneath it, he wore a close-cut suit of midnight blue, the jacket edged with scarlet and decorated with a pattern of repeated symbols in red and green and yellow. It was so rich, so marvelous, Atrus could barely keep his eyes from it. But there were other fantastic things to be seen, not least of which was the pipe that lay beside him on the ledge. The bottom of the pipe was a hollowed wooden bowl from which a shaped glass stock trimmed with silver led to a curved copper mouthpiece. A tiny domed cap was set into the bowl in the front of the stock, while at the center of the bowl, feeding into the glass of the stock, was a thick silver spindle. As Atrus watched, Gen took a tiny glass sphere from his pouch and the thick leather belt he wore. Turning it upside down, Gen shook it gently, revealing a clear liquid that moved slowly, gluttonously, its surface reflecting the yellow lamplight like oil. Resting the sphere on his knees, Gen unscrewed the lid to the spindle and set it aside, then poured a tiny amount of the liquid into the stock and replaced the lid. Then, taking a smaller leather bag from his jacket pocket, he took something from inside. Atrus gasped. It looked like the marble he had found earlier. Gen placed it within the domed cap. Anna turned from where she stood and looked at Gen. "Will you be staying long?" Gen glanced at her and then replaced the lid of the cap. "No, I have to leave tomorrow," he answered, his voice heavily accented. "Ah." There was regret in Anna's voice, hurt in those dark, familiar eyes. "It's just that, well, I thought you might stay with Atrus a while, get to know him. Perhaps. He's a good boy, you'd be proud of him, and after all..." Gen tightened the cap and looked at her, his face expressionless. "I intend to take him with me." Anna turned, facing him, shock in her face. "With you?" Atrus, watching the darkness, felt his pulse quicken, his mouth grow dry. His heart was thudding in his chest. Gen lifted the pipe, staring at it, then cupped it between his hands and pressed the thumb down on the silver spindle. There was a snapping sound, and the pipe seemed to come alive, burning briefly with a fierce blue light. After a moment, the same light filled the whole of the stock, making the strange oil-like liquid gently bubble. In the strange, unearthly light, Gen's face seemed very different, the shadows inverted. "Yes," he answered, meeting Anna's eyes. "Have you a problem with that?" "But Atrus belongs here." "Here!" There was incredulity in Gen's voice. "And where is here?" "Nowhere. That is where. A hole in the ground. That's all this is." "Yes, and that's all this will ever be. This is no place for a son of mine. No place at all." Anna fell silent, watching Gen as he lifted the copper mouthpiece to his mouth and inhaled, the muscles in her cheek twitching oddly. Then she spoke again, quieter than before, yet with the firmness Atrus recognized at once. "But he's not ready yet. He's too young. There's so much he has to learn." Taking the pipe from his mouth, Gen interrupted her. "Of course Atrus is ready. Why, he's exactly the age I was when I first left here. And as for his education, that is the very reason I returned, so that I could teach him." "You?" Anna's tone was incredulous, yet Gen seemed indifferent to her criticism. "Who better? I am at least educated to the task, and I am his father." Gen set the pipe down and leaned toward Anna, frowning. You did tell him about me. She looked away, a tightness in her face. Gen stood angry now. You mean you told him nothing? Kareth, damn you, woman, how could you? Anna kept her voice low, conscious of Atrus outside, listening. And what was I to say? That his father left the very hour he was born? That he didn't even care to name him? I would have called him Atrus, you know that. She turned back, glaring at him, suddenly explosively angry. Yes, but you didn't. I did. Yes, and I raised him. Me, Gen, not you. And now you want him back, as though he were a parcel you'd left with me for safekeeping? Boys aren't parcels, Gen. They're living, growing things, and Atrus hasn't finished his growing. I shall decide that, he said gruffly. Besides, he can help me with my studies, be my assistant. Your assistant? In my researches, I have need of a willing helper, and the boy seems willing enough. Researches into what? Into the Denis culture. The Denis? Anna laughed bitterly. All that is gone. Don't you understand that yet? No, he answered, drawing himself up, a note of pride entering his voice. You're wrong. That's where I've been these past 14 years. In Denis, researching, studying, seeking out the great and mighty secrets of the Denis culture. He gave a single dignified nod. I tell you, none of it was lost. It is still all there. Anna, watching, felt a shiver go down his spine. Atrus, watching, felt a shiver go down his spine. A tiny ripple of disbelief making him feel for that instant like he was in a dream. Still there, but that was impossible, surely. Anna shook her head dismissively. No, Ken, you forget. I've seen it with these eyes. It's gone. Destroyed. Can't you accept that? Can't you forget the past? Gen stared back at her coldly, imperiously, accepting nothing. Oh, I can easily believe that you would like to forget it. She stared back at him silently. You never valued it, did you? He continued, not sparing her. You never cared for it the way I cared. But I'm not having that for my son. I want him to know about his past. I want him to be proud of it, the way I am proud of it. He bristled with indignation. I shall not betray him the way you betrayed me. Again, how can you say that? I did my best for you. Your best. And how good was your best? This hole in the ground you call a home, is that your best? Anna looked away. Atrus should decide. You can't just take him. Gen leaned right into her, his face only inches from her own. Of course I can. I am the boy's father. It is my right. Then let me come with you. Let me look after the boy while you're teaching him. Gen shook his head. That would not be right. It would not be the Denis way. Or do you forget about that also? Do you forget how you gave me up to the guild when I was but 4 years old? But his voice overrid hers harshly. But nothing. He's coming with me, and that is that. If you wish to help, you might pack a knapsack for him for the journey. Not that he'll need much. But Gen, she reached out, touching his arm, but he pulled away from her, turning. Gen reached down and picked up his pipe, and then tugging open the door, he stepped out into the open air. For a moment, he stood there, turned away from where Atrus lay, drawing on his pipe. The light from the kitchen making a silhouette of him, and then he turned back, his chest and arms and face revealed in the faint blue glow of the pipe. Atrus, he said, speaking to the boy where he lay on his belly in the cleft wall. Go to bed now and get some sleep. You shall be leaving early in the morning.